At a 500 a plate wedding in downtown Boston, my husband leaned over, smiled at his old college friend, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Claire's not exactly the interesting type." Everyone laughed. I smiled too, until that night when I decided I was done playing the quiet wife in his perfect Beacon Hill life. A quiet, loyal wife humiliated by her husband's cruel remark at a luxury wedding decides to reinvent herself. And when she finally walks away, he learns just how interesting she can be. The ballroom shimmered under golden chandeliers, every crystal drop catching the light like champagne bubbles. The string quartet played softly, the hum of laughter bouncing off the marble floors. It was one of those Boston weddings where every smile felt curated, and every compliment cost something. Mark loved these nights. He thrived in them. I stood beside him in a pale blue gown, smiling politely as he shook hands with old college friends. They were tall, loud, confident, the kind of men who ordered $200 bottles of wine just because. The women looked effortlessly elegant, their laughter crisp and rehearsed. Mark slid his arm around my waist, his cufflinks gleaming. "Guys, this is Claire," he said proudly, as if introducing a product. "My wife." Keeps me grounded. One of the women, a glamorous brunette named Vanessa, smiled at me. "So Claire, what do you do?" "Mark said you used to work in publishing?" I nodded. "Yes, I did. I left when my father got sick." But Mark cut me off, chuckling. "She's not the career type. Claire's more home-based," the group laughed. I forced a smile, my stomach twisting. Vanessa tilted her head. "Oh, so you're more the behind-the-scenes type?" Before I could answer, Mark raised his glass and said it, the words that would split something deep inside me. "Claire's wonderful," he said, smirking. "Just not the interesting type, you know?" Laughter again. Even Vanessa laughed. The violinists played louder, but I still heard the echo in my head. "Not interesting." I took a slow sip of champagne, my hand trembling slightly. "I think I'll get some air," I murmured. Outside, the city was cold and sharp. I stood on the terrace overlooking the Boston skyline, the glow of Beacon Hill visible in the distance. The wind tugged at my hair and I felt my eyes sting, not from the cold. Inside, Mark's laughter carried through the glass doors. He didn't mean to be cruel, I told myself. That's just his humor, polished, charming, careless. But something inside me shifted that night, a quiet click like a door unlocking. When he finally found me again, he wrapped his arm around me. "There you are," he said cheerfully. "You disappeared. Everyone asked where my wife went." "I needed a break from being not interesting," I said softly. He chuckled, not catching the edge in my voice. "Come on, don't take jokes so seriously. You know how I am." I nodded and followed him back into the ballroom. But I didn't hold his hand this time. I just walked beside him. A stranger in my own life. Later that night, in our Beacon Hill condo, I stood by the window while Mark loosened his tie and scrolled through his phone. The city below was alive, glowing cars tracing lines of light through the darkness. "You were quiet tonight," he said without looking up. "Just tired," I replied. He grinned faintly. "You should try talking more at these things. People like confidence. That was it. No apology. No awareness. Just advice from the man who'd humiliated me." When he turned off the light and fell asleep, I stayed awake, staring at the skyline. The same skyline I used to love, that now looked like a cage made of glass. In the reflection of the window, I saw my own face. Calm, quiet, unreadable. I realized I had spent years being exactly what he wanted. Soft, accommodating, predictable, not interesting. I whispered the words to the empty room, like a curse I was finally ready to break. Something new sparked in me, faint, fragile, but real. Tomorrow, I told myself, things will start to change. The days after the wedding felt heavy, like Boston in February, gray and slow. I moved through our Beacon Hill condo like a ghost, folding laundry, making coffee, answering Mark with short replies that barely left a mark on the air. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. Every morning, he'd put on his navy suit, fix his perfect hair, and kiss me on the cheek before heading to his finance firm downtown. I'd stand by the door, feeling that kiss like a stamp of ownership rather than affection. I stopped asking about his day, stopped cooking elaborate dinners, stopped pretending to be impressed when he dropped client names like confetti. Instead, I started walking. Long walks through Charles Street, past bookstores and art galleries I used to love but hadn't stepped into in years. One rainy afternoon, I ducked into a small coffee shop near the public garden, the kind with crooked wooden tables and quiet jazz playing in the background. That's where I met him. He was sketching by the window, a man in his 50s, gray-streaked hair, paint smudges on his hands. His name was Elliot. When I glanced at his drawing, he smiled. "You have an artist's eye," he said. I laughed nervously. "Oh no, I used to love art, but life happened." "Life always happens," he replied, closing his sketchbook. "That's why we paint, to remind ourselves we're still here." Those words stayed with me. That evening, while Mark scrolled through sports news beside me on the couch, I looked up local art classes on my phone. The next morning, I signed up for one, Tuesday and Thursday nights, under Elliot's name. I didn't tell Mark. At first, I told him I was meeting friends for dinner or volunteering. He barely reacted. "That's good," he said distractedly. "Gives me time to catch up on work." But those nights became sacred to me. The studio smelled like turpentine and fresh canvas. The hum of brushes and soft music replaced the silence of our apartment. I painted timidly at first, blurred flowers, gray skylines. But with every stroke, I started to feel awake. Elliot would walk by and nod approvingly. "You're finding your voice, Claire," he'd say. My voice. I hadn't thought about it in years. One Thursday after class, I stayed behind cleaning brushes. Elliot glanced at my latest piece, a quiet street in Beacon Hill, all shadows and sharp edges. "That's not just a painting," he said. "That's a feeling," I smiled, though my eyes stung. Maybe it's what home feels like lately. At home, Mark was still awake, sitting on the couch with a glass of scotch. "You're out late," he said casually. "Where have you been?" "Art class," I answered. I decided to stop lying. He raised an eyebrow. "Art class? Since when?" "Since now," he chuckled. "That's cute." "Everyone needs a hobby," I didn't reply. His words landed exactly how they were meant to. Small, diminishing, effortless. Over the next few weeks, I painted more. I started dressing differently. Jeans splattered with paint, hair tied loosely. I felt lighter, freer. But the distance between us grew wider. One night at dinner, I caught him studying me as I scrolled through photos of my work. "You're really into this, huh?" he said. "I am. Just don't get carried away," he added with a grin. "You're not one of those artsy people." I looked at him, the man who measured life in business lunches and square footage, and realized he didn't even see me anymore. He saw a version of me that made him comfortable. That night, as I cleaned the brushes in our kitchen sink, I felt the cold water running over my fingers and thought of Elliot's words again. We paint to remind ourselves we're still here. For the first time in a long while, I truly was, and I wasn't going back. Spring rolled into Boston quietly, the kind of season that smells like wet brick and tulip petals. I found myself waking up early, eager to paint, eager to feel. The mornings that used to blur into coffee and silence now felt like chapters waiting to be written. My studio space was small, the spare room that Mark once used as an office. His old desk was pushed against the wall now, replaced by an easel and streaks of color on the hardwood floor. I liked it that way. It looked alive. Mark didn't. One Sunday, he stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, looking at my half-finished canvas, a stormy seascape inspired by the harbor. "You're really committed to this," he said, half smiling. "How long's this phase supposed to last?" I kept painting. "It's not a phase," he chuckled, the sound low and sharp. "You say that like you're planning to make this a career." I set the brush down. Maybe I am. He blinked as if I'd spoken another language. Claire, come on. You're not trying to be someone now, are you? The words froze me. That tone, the same patronizing edge he used with interns and waiters. I met his gaze calmly. I already am someone, Mark. You just never noticed. He laughed and walked away. But that night I painted until dawn. At art class, Elliot noticed my fire. Something's changed, he said. Your work's bold now, confident. I stopped asking for permission, I replied, smiling faintly. My paintings started catching attention. The local gallery near Tremont Street invited me to submit a few pieces for their Emerging Artists Night. I almost said no. Old habits die hard. But Elliot convinced me. You don't need permission to exist, he said. The night of the showcase, I wore a simple black dress, my hair loosely pinned back. My heart raced as I stepped into the gallery, walls lined with color, the soft buzz of conversation in the air. People stopped to look at my work, to talk to me. About me. It felt surreal. Your brushstrokes tell a story, one woman said. There's loneliness, but also hope. I smiled because she was right. Elliot raised a glass from across the room, proud like a mentor. See? You're interesting now. He teased gently. That word, the one that used to sting, now made me laugh. When I got home that night, the condo was quiet. Mark was watching late-night TV, tie loosened, glass of bourbon in hand. He didn't look up when I entered. How was your thing? He asked, eyes still on the screen. My exhibit? I said evenly. It went well. People liked my work. That's nice, he replied flatly. Did you make any money? I froze in the doorway, watching the blue light flicker across his face. He wasn't being cruel, just empty. The man who once told me he wanted a partner now wanted a prop. Quiet, polite, reliable. I didn't go for money, I said softly. I went for meaning. He glanced at me for the first time, confused. Meaning? Yes, I whispered. Something you can't expense. He looked away, muttering. You've changed. Maybe I finally started being myself. I turned and walked to my studio, the echo of my heels on the floor sounding like punctuation. The end of something. That night, as the city lights spilled through the window, I started a new painting. A woman walking away from a glittering ballroom, her back straight, her dress catching light. I didn't need to title it. I already knew what it was. It was me. The evening of my gallery debut was clear and sharp, one of those early summer nights where Boston feels like it's holding its breath. I stood outside Tremont Gallery, my heart hammering in my chest. The sign out front read, Emerging Voices Local Artists of the Year. I was one of them. Inside, the space glowed with soft amber light. My paintings hung along the left wall, the stormy seascape, the Beacon Hill shadows, and the one I'd finished just last week, a woman walking into the sunrise. People gathered around, murmuring, studying the details. Elliot approached, smiling warmly. You did it, he said, squeezing my shoulder. You didn't wait for anyone's permission this time. I laughed softly. Feels strange being seen. Strange is good, he said. It means you're alive. The night unfolded like a dream. Guests asked about my inspiration, my technique, my story. For the first time in years, people listened. Not because I was someone's wife, but because I was me. Halfway through the night, my phone buzzed in my clutch. Mark, don't wait up. Dinner ran late. I stared at the message for a long time, then slipped the phone back into my bag. I didn't feel sad, just done. When the event ended, the gallery owner approached me. Claire, I'd love to feature your work in our fall collection. You've got something special. I thanked her, smiling as I looked around the room. The laughter, the warmth, the quiet thrill of belonging. This was my world now. That night, I returned home to the Beacon Hill condo. It felt different, colder, quieter, too pristine. The walls looked sterile, the furniture expensive but lifeless. I walked through each room like I was saying goodbye. Mark's shoes were by the door. His jacket hung neatly on the rack. Everything in its place, exactly as he liked it. I stood in our bedroom doorway, staring at the king-size bed, the matching lamps, the framed photos of us smiling in Paris, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, all those perfect places where I'd felt invisible. My eyes landed on one picture. Me in a white sundress, laughing, Mark's arm around my shoulders. I took it down, held it for a moment, then set it face down on the dresser. Then I started packing, not in a rage, not in tears. Just quiet resolve. Jeans, blouses, art supplies, my canvases. The sound of the suitcase zipping was the most peaceful sound I'd heard in years. By the time dawn touched the window, my bags were by the door. I left my keys on the counter, right next to the framed photo. When I stepped outside, the early light brushed the cobblestones. I took one last look at the street, the same one I used to think was a symbol of success. Now, it just looked like a pretty prison. I called a cab to Cambridge, to the small artist loft I'd rented after the gallery owner connected me with a landlord. The space was nothing fancy, exposed brick, big windows, paint stains on the floor. But it felt real, mine. That evening, I opened the window and let the city sounds drift in. Laughter, sirens, music from a street performer below. I picked up a brush and began painting again, this time without hesitation. No one to impress, no one to silence me. The painting that emerged that night was of a house on a hill with all its lights turned off. But behind it, the horizon glowed. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and that whisper was finally louder than his voice. 6 months passed before I saw him again. Boston had shifted seasons twice. The leaves that once flamed gold in the public garden now scattered in pale drifts along the Charles River. My loft smelled like oil paint and coffee. I had 3 new canvases drying against the wall and a small stack of invitations on the table. Another exhibit, this time solo. The emails were still coming in, small galleries, art blogs, local interviews. I wasn't famous, but I was being seen. And every time someone described my work as raw, emotional, or honest, I felt a tiny piece of the old me dissolve. Then on opening night, I turned around, and there he was. Mark, still immaculate in his tailored suit, hair perfectly in place. But there was something different in his face. A weariness, maybe. A man who'd lost control of a story he thought he was writing. "Claire?" he said softly, as if saying my name required effort. "I didn't know if you'd talk to me." I blinked, steadying myself. "Hello, Mark." He glanced around at the walls filled with color, stormy oceans, quiet streets, sunrises. "This is incredible. You actually did it." "I did," I said simply. He gave a small laugh, shaking his head. "You've changed. You're actually interesting now." The room seemed to go quiet for a second. I took a slow breath and met his eyes. "I always was, Mark. You just never looked close enough." His smile faltered. "I didn't mean—" "I know exactly what you meant," I interrupted gently. "You wanted a wife who fit the picture. Someone quiet enough not to cast a shadow." He sighed. "I was stupid. I thought success was about image. But after you left—" He paused, looking down at his shoes. "The condo feels like a museum now. Everything's there, except life." I studied him for a moment, remembering the man who once made me laugh, who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sundays. But that man had vanished long before I walked out the door.